Welcome, everybody. I am honored today to have Dr. Barry Posner as my guest on the podcast. He is the Accolti Endowed Professor of Leadership at the Leavey School of Business at Santa Clara University. That is where I went to school. Barry has been there since 1976. He served for 12 years now as the dean of the school. His education ranges from UC Santa Barbara undergrad in poli-sci to his master's at The Ohio State University to his PhD in organizational behavior and administrative theory at UMass Amherst Eisenberg School of Management. Dr. Posner is one of the world's foremost scholars on the subject of leadership. He's the co-author of at least a dozen books on the subject, and he's best known for his award-winning book, The Leadership Challenge, which has sold over 3 million copies in 22 languages all around the world. The Leadership Challenge has been recognized as one of the top 100 best business books of all time, and we're going to dissect its 5 core principles today. Dr. Posner, thank you so much for joining me.
Dan, my pleasure so far.
Hopefully it'll stay that way.
Certainly.
We'll see. Well, you got a Bronco here, so hopefully that'll be great.
Good.
Yeah. So your signature work is the Leadership Challenge. Why don't we start by having you tell us how this book and the principles that are in it came about?
Well, Dan, probably while you were an undergraduate student, in 1983, my co-author Jim Kouzes and I were doing a 2-day leadership seminar. The first day was being done at the time by a fellow named Tom Peters and Bob Waterman. A few months before that, so this is February, but a few months before that, they had published a book called In Search of Excellence. Still find that book around. It was about what excellent companies do.
Yep.
It's a 2-day program, but the second day was, I think people came for Tom Peters, but they stuck around the second day for Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner. And Tom talked a lot about what organizations need to do, but it was really aimed at being a senior executive, and there's very few people at the top. So
right. Our
audience, like the people we're talking with, listening in, Dan, with us today, they're not the CEO of the company. They're important people doing important things. And so we had the challenge the next day to try and take this down to an individual level. So what do you do at your level? You're a frontline supervisor, you're a manager, a division manager, a general manager. What do? You can't make everything happen just because you say so. So that day, we didn't have as many answers as we think we have today. 6 editions now of the Leadership Challenge, and just finishing writing the 7th edition. So what we learned that day came about because we asked people to tell us about a time that they had been at their personal best as a leader. That question has guided us for more than 40 years of continuing to collect case studies and data around the world of people answering that question, filling out a questionnaire, writing an essay about that time. And what we discovered that particular day was that when we asked people to talk about a time they'd been at their personal best, whether it had been 2 months ago or 10 years ago, whether it had been in sales and marketing, whether it had been in finance, HR, law enforcement, high technology, you name it. And whether you were tall or short, thick or thin, blue or green, none of those seemed to make a difference. It's somehow that there were some universal things that people did when they recalled the time that they had been at their personal best. And that day, all of us were awestruck by the similarity in our findings. And Jim and I would spend then a few more years collecting more data, and then publish the 1st edition, in which we talked about what we came to call the 5 practices of exemplary leadership.
Excellent. The question of tell us about a time when you've been at your personal best, or you've seen someone at their personal best as a leader, it reminds me of a principle called appreciative inquiry that is pioneered by David Cooper-Ryder.
Sure.
Are you familiar with that and with David?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This is really built upon if you will, even today we talk about kind of a movement in positive psychology.
Right.
the notion of building from our strengths. Um, we'll talk about modeling the way, and I'll make the comment that we learn more from positive models than we do from negative models.
Yeah.
Negative models help us figure out what not to do, but they don't necessarily help us figure out what it is that we're supposed to be doing. And one of the things that we found, if I sort of go into these 5 practices, we found that one of the most important things that people did when they were at their personal best is they set a personal example for what they expected of others. And in order to do that, kind of the precursor to do that was that they needed to, first of all, what we called kind of clarify your values and find your voice. Before anybody can follow me, I've got to be willing to follow me. So I've got to figure out what it is that I care about and what's important to me and what I stand for and what I'd be willing to, talk about convictions, what I'd be willing to be convicted for.
Right.
And if I can do that, then it's possible for me to have great credibility. We call it Dwizzywid, do what you say you will do.
Right.
So these are the things that I say. I make these, and you know how important this is in sales. You make a promise, and you better keep it. Maybe you'll continue to get that sale, but you won't get the next sale if you don't come through on your first promise. And for Cutco's got certainly a promise that it makes, and it stands by that. 20 years later, I can return a product if it's not working. That's a lifetime promise.
Right. We'll definitely get into talking about credibility today. I know that's one of the things that I have to ask you about, and how that's developed and how sometimes it's also undermined.
Sure.
So you've got the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. We have model the way, inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, and encourage the heart. I can remember learning about these things 30 plus years ago, and beginning to put them into action in my own business and my own personal life. So I'd really love to get into these 5 practices. And the first one in the most recent edition of the book here is model the way. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, as I started to say, when we asked people to tell us about their personal best, they didn't necessarily say, I modeled the way, but we use that as a term to capture the things that they did say that they did. They were clear about their objectives. They were clear about who they were. They had values that they were clear about, and they lived those values. They held other people accountable. They were deeply committed. They led by example. These would all be things that people said they did when they were at their personal best, or when asked, so tell me about the best leader you've ever worked with. Tell me what he or she did. These are the kinds of things they would say that's what my best leader set a great example. Was the kind of person we'd want to emulate. Never made a promise that he or she couldn't keep. So what's really critical, and in some ways is a place that leadership begins at a personal level, begins with answering the question, well, who am I? Because leadership fundamentally is a relationship between those who would be led and those who would willingly follow.
Right.
And in that relationship, like any relationship, you want to know, well, who is this person? What are they like? What do we have in common? And from that, I can figure out, whether I want to be with this person, engage with this person, follow this person, do what this person asks me to do, believe this person when they tell me these are the facts, or this is what the horizon looks like ahead. And the other piece here is that the other thing that leaders do, because they're clear themselves about their own values and standards, is that it makes it easier for them to hold other people accountable to the same. So they work hard to what we call affirm shared values. So in this relationship, Dan, it's it's not just these are my values and I don't care about yours, but rather these are my values. I'm interested to know about yours, and I'm interested to find out what are the things that we share in common and that we can hold each other accountable for.
Yeah.
So
I really,
that's where it begins.
I really appreciate that it begins with who a person is as a leader, what are their values, and finding ways of making sure that that is projected out to the potential followers, right? You said leadership is a relationship between those who want to lead and those who would want to follow. And it seems like that what people follow is the leader first more than the vision. I see a lot of leaders that will promote like, hey, here's what you can do, here's where you can go, and they're promoting the vision. But if they don't have that relationship, if they don't have that connection, that credibility, the vision doesn't really matter. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, we call that the first law of leadership. If you don't believe in the messenger, you won't believe their message.
Mm.
So, we can say all kinds of grand things, but in the end, if we don't believe the person, it's very hard for us to somehow pay attention and to believe their message. And what's kind of very true these days, but it's been true for decades, is generally when people quit, they quit their manager. They don't quit the organization, quit the relationship. I leave this organization not because I don't care about the product or the service, the people we interact with. I'm just leaving this organization because I don't care for I don't believe in the person that is supervising me. I don't believe that they're honest. I don't believe that they care about me. I don't believe that they keep their promises. And so I'm going to get into another relationship. I'm not going to stay here.
That's such a great insight, Barry. I'm going to ask you some questions throughout this that pertain to our organization and just some of the growing pains we've experienced through the pandemic here. But in 2020, obviously, we were forced to change everything that we did in a very short amount of time. And literally in about 5 weeks in March and April, we virtualized every element of how we operate. And it worked great in 2020 when there was nothing else for people to do and there were no jobs, and everything worked really well for us. But in 2021 and 2022, we've been trying to navigate which of the things we changed to are effective and which are not. And one of the things that I look at is this element of connection to the leader. Because in up to 2020, a young person working with us would have been around their manager several times a week. They would have had this relationship where there's side conversations going out to the car after a meeting, where there's lunches,
Yep.
where there's all of this like personal connection that really tied people in. And while I don't think we have done anything that's sort of on the the bad side of like damaging relationships, I don't think most of our managers do things that are sort of negative examples. We have failed to do enough of the positive stuff of connecting with people during this sort of virtual age. And it's one of those things that we're trying to work through right now and figure out, how can we find opportunities for greater connection while maintaining some or many of the innovations that we've created over the last few years. So it's a real challenge for us right now to navigate.
Well, absolutely. And today it's the and, not the or. It's high touch and high tech. It's not either or. The pandemic, shifted the balance, but we're coming back now where I think actually even more so, we really do want to be with people.
Right.
And so much of the knowledge that goes on in an organization is informal. It's not written down. And it's the lessons learned through experience that's oftentimes given, moment by moment. So
Yeah, exactly. And modeling the way a lot of times is when you're physically right there watching how someone acts, how they interact with someone, how they treat someone, how they respond to different things that come up, right?
yeah, and you can't, and it's there's an old joke about kind of consultants, but you could put some other kind of person in it, but it's like consultants, know 50 ways to make love, but they have no relationships.
Mm.
So, you can read about how to drive a car, but eventually you have to get behind the wheel. And so the challenge for us is to have that opportunity to kind of get behind the wheel. And while we talked about positive psychology, the other truth is that we also make adjustments, because we won't always get it right. And one of the clear things that you and your colleagues have already learned in sales is you don't get 100% of the sales.
Mhm.
And you can do everything right and still you don't get the sale. So it's important to kind of also have a sense of perspective in all of this. And some of that comes through the leader's ability to tell stories. And I'm sure, Dan, over your years with Cutco, you've told lots of stories about when I was a young person starting out, and here's what I learned, and here's what I learned from my mentors, and here's some things that that I've discovered are kind of some truths. No matter who I'm working with, I need to be doing these things. And there's an art to all of this, not just a science. Because what we might do with any of these five practices, we need to understand something about the environment. So how we model the way. I'm making this up. How we model the way in a sales and marketing organization might be different if you were in the accounting function, or if you were in the transportation industry, it might be different than if you were in healthcare. But gosh, everybody would clearly say, the most important role model that I have in an organization is my manager.
Mm-hmm.
And we remind people that to the people who report to you, you're the most important leader in the organization, like it or not. Because some people say, but I don't want to be the most important leader, but that's the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. You earlier said that, you're talking to important people doing important things, even though they're not CEOs. And that's really how I view every leader in our organization. Is they are the most important person to the people that report to them, that follow them. And they've got to be able to set that positive example and build that mentoring relationship, as you've described.
Well, and everybody in your organization, from a customer perspective, represents the organization. I mean,
Right.
I know Cutco through the person who sold me the product.
Yep.
I don't know it necessarily through you or hundreds of other people in the company.
Right.
That young man or woman who comes to my home, or I meet someplace, they are the company.
Yeah.
And so they're so it's important kind of who we are and who we are and how we are.
Yeah. And that credibility you described and I've seen a TED talk where you say credibility is the foundation of leadership.
Yeah, and and in that TED talk, I say that, but I also talk about how you need to understand you're the most important leader in the organization, and you can't do it alone. It starts with you, but it doesn't end with you. It
Mm-hmm.
starts with you and it ends with them, because it's hard to imagine you can be a leader if nobody's willing to follow you. So again, that's the importance of understanding this is a relationship. starts with you, but there needs to be an appreciation for the paradox of leaders turning their followers into leaders. I want to be in a relationship with you because being in a relationship with you makes me better, makes me stronger, makes me more efficacious, makes me happier. And if that's not the truth, then why would I want to continue to be in a relationship with you? I'd look for some other relationship with, whether I'm talking about you, an individual, or you, the organization, you, the team. I want to feel good about myself in my relationship with you.
Right. This gives every leader a great opportunity to think about how are they modeling the way for their people, and how are they making people feel in that relationship, and is it the right foundation for everything else that we want to accomplish?
Yeah, and that's, if we talk about these, in some kind of order, when we talk about enabling others to act, that becomes a really important principle to think about. So in this interaction with this other person, how did I behave in such a way that made them more confident, made them more competent? How did I leave them stronger as a result of this conversation, this interaction? Because that would be, as a leader, that's what we call enabling others to act. You can teach everybody about your product so they're competent in your product, but if they don't have the self-confidence to go up to strangers and talk,
right,
then all the product knowledge in the world isn't going to make a difference.
Yeah, exactly. I'm excited to make sure we get to all of these 5 practices here. The second practice is inspire a shared vision. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, again, when we were talking with people about their personal best, no one said I inspired a shared vision. But what they did say were the 3 important concepts. One is that they had a vision. And oftentimes they didn't use the word vision. They used, I had a goal, I had an objective. Years ago, we interviewed Andy Grove as one of the founders of Intel, and we asked him about, so what was your agenda when you started Intel? And his comment was, I didn't have a vision, I had a burning agenda. So there was something passionate that I really cared about, and it was something that didn't exist today. It was something future oriented, very, very important. Leaders are focused on the future. We'll see that when we talk about challenging the process, but leaders are focused on the future. It's a notion of not just thinking about kind of if I were in first responder in fire, well, we're seeing this today. We're really trying to spend more time on fire prevention so that we don't have to fight fires. So we're trying to think about, okay, next year, what do we need to do in the forest and the hills and the mountains now so that next year we don't have to fight so many fires? Because if we don't think about that, then every year we're going to be kind of doing the same thing over and over again, which is, fighting fires and complaining about, well, why haven't we cut back the trees and the brush and the this and the that? I see the ads for PG&E, which is saying we decided to underground, lots more lines, because in the long run, that's going to reduce the likelihood of fire starting through our equipment. And so one, it's about vision. Secondly, it's about sharing the vision. And so lots of times when they're at their personal best, people talked about, I had to get buy-in. I had to communicate. So if in real estate, it's location. For leaders, it's communicate. You almost can't over communicate when it comes to leadership, in terms of kind of having a theme, a repetitive sort of theme about, you're always talking about, and depending upon the company, you're talking about sales, or you're talking about customer service, or you're talking about safety, or you're talking about innovation. But that's a mantra that everybody in the organization knows, that this is what we're focused on, and they all kind of share that vision. And then the inspiration comes from you got to get excited about it. You got to be positive. You got to be optimistic, not unrealistic. But even to say these are tough times is to say that these are tough times, but is to put them in perspective. There's always been tough times, and we've gotten through those tough times, and we'll get through this tough time too. And even if I don't know exactly how today, I'm confident that with the good people we have around me, we're going to be able to figure this out. We're going to persevere. And as you said, and in 5 weeks, we're going to change from in-person sales to virtual sales. And we're going to do it. And we did it.
Right. Yeah. And that certainly is the same mindset around how we need to navigate, the current challenges in our business. I love the fighting fires analogy you use, because the way I feel like some people operate their business and their life is they're constantly fighting fires, and they don't think far enough down the road to be able to prevent the fires instead. And that's obviously a much more effective way of operating, is thinking farther down the road and having a little bit more of a longer term view.
Absolutely. We oftentimes say that leaders need to be thinking beyond the end of whatever it is they're now doing. So don't wait till you get to the end. So even when we're working with students, it's not, don't wait till you graduate to think about what you want to do in the next stage of your life. Start thinking about that before you get there. And maybe some of the things you're going to do today are going to be things that the decisions that you're going to make today, because they're going to propel you to some place that you want to be in the future. Mm-hmm. The other analogy, it's kind of surfing here. You look behind you for those big waves, and then you get ready to ride them, and ride the powerful ones, and get yourself going. So inspiring a shared vision. The other piece of that is the fact that leaders are also kind of making sure, again, this importance of sharing is that they're really enlisting people. So again, it's not just my values, but it's our values. It's not just my vision, but it's our vision.
So is the vision best created top down, or is it best created bottom up?
It's created collaboratively. It oftentimes, a famous example of that is in 1963, Martin Luther King says, I have a dream. And he says, but in order for this dream to be accomplished, here's what we are going to have to do. We're going to have to struggle together. We're going to have to fight together. We may have to go to jail together, so that my 4 children can walk hand in hand down the street safely with your 4 children. So it's not just about, let's do this because then my 4 children will be safe. Let's do this because my 4 children and your 4 children will be safe. So we have to share this, and the longevity of an organization is oftentimes because from generation to generation to generation, we continue to have the same commitment to a set of values and beliefs and principles of how we're going to be. And I think it's perfectly okay to ask the question, to be sensitive to the question that other people will ask their manager. Yeah. So what's in this for me? Well, I think you need to be able to answer that. And it's really probably not so much what's in it for me or for you, but what's in it for us. And oftentimes what's in it for the customer or the service that we're providing. I mean, that's the other thing that we're seeing, that organizations need increasingly to be purpose driven. One of the things that's so great typically in a sales function is you get close to customers. I mean, if you're not, then you're wondering, so why should I care about whether the quarterly financial statements work or don't work? But because I don't have a sense of the customer, or a manufacturing person who's putting product together but doesn't necessarily see what somebody does with that product. That sense of purpose, increasingly for millennials, is a choice that they're making in terms of why I would want to be in this workplace versus another workplace. So that's another part of, if you will, it's inspiring a shared purpose. Why look, the question you have to kind of answer is, why do I care? Why do I work so hard? And why should you work so hard? Why should we all work so hard?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about the hard work, it's about the why.
Right. So the leader's values are, they're internal, they're uncompromising. The goals or the objectives that the leader or the team has should be sort of collaboratively created by involving some segment of the leader's team or following.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, you would like everybody in the company to feel like they were an owner. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, just thinking, owners have a certain kind of mentality, in terms of how they care about what's happening in the entire business, and they understand what's happening in the entire business. They understand, even if they're in one part of it, they understand the totality of it. We at Santa Clara, we have a number of internships in which people work in very small businesses, and one of the things that they learn there is something like just simple as cash flow, just right. And how that works itself through the organization that you might not see if you worked at Apple. You might not appreciate kind of that understanding of the total business that an owner has an appreciation for.
Yeah, for sure. Every rep in Cutco is an independent contractor, and so they truly are the owner of their own little part of what they do, and they get that, a little bit of that mentality. Like, we really try to teach that, the sort of the self-employed mentality. Even if you end up being an employee somewhere, the self-employed mentality, I think, is an important part of what people learn working with us.
Yeah. There's some interesting research that suggests that people who have had experience as entrepreneurs, and so I'm, independent contractors, owners, end up being more successful over the course of their career than those who have never had that experience. So even if their business for one reason or another wasn't successful, or they sold it and moved on, that experience, I think is truly invaluable. And the research suggests that experience also, pays you back many-fold later on in your career, even if you work for a 10,000, 100,000 person organization, you carry that mentality with you.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So inspiring the shared vision, that's our second practice after model the way. The third practice you have is challenge the process. Can you unpack that for us?
Sure. Well, in all of this, we call the book The Leadership Challenge, because, challenge is the opportunity for greatness. There are certainly a lot of hardships that came out of the pandemic, but there was a lot of innovation. There were a lot of people who got a chance to do something that they hadn't had a chance to do before. The whole work from anywhere, which is going to continue in many different forms, and the technology that's developed to support that, that wouldn't have happened without this challenge, without this hardship. So leaders kind of deal with this in the process of at their personal best. They talk about how they approach challenges with kind of an experimental perspective, like a scientist would. I don't exactly, a scientist sort of says, I don't exactly know the answer to this question, so I'm going to set up an experiment, a pilot project, a demonstration project,
Mhm.
A lot of different terms for it. And then we're going to collect some data, and then we're going to look at the data, and we're going to kind of figure out what we learned from that. And in that sense, leaders are great learners. They're willing to, if you will, kind of, fail, 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 fail. This is sales too. Fail, 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 and then you get a sale.
Yeah.
And probably really true when you're first starting out. So it's that notion that what leaders do is that they're willing to. They're really, I think, kind of mentality is that they have what we call a growth mindset, as opposed to a fixed mindset. They believe that they and others can in fact learn and get better, as opposed to a fixed mindset, which somehow says, look, whatever it is that you now know, or however good you are now, it's kind of fixed, it's kind of locked in, and you're not really going to get much better with that. But if you have a growth mindset, then you appreciate that one of the ways that you're going to learn is you're going to learn by trial and error. Great teachers, as long as you don't get into a rut of making the same mistakes over and over again.
Right.
And that's where, by the way, mentors and coaches and the best managers can help, is to make sure that when things don't. In fact, one of the things we look at is in an instrument that we have called the Leadership Practices Inventory. One of the key questions about leaders is, to what extent does this leader ask the question, what can we learn when things don't go as expected? And direct reports indicate that the more frequently their manager has that kind of viewpoint, asks that kind of question, the harder they're willing to work, the happier they are being in this organization, the greater sense of satisfaction that they get from the work that they do, the more hours they'd be willing to put into their jobs.
Yeah.
And so, and again, that's a part of enabling others to act. People need to be able. They can't get any better if you don't give them chances to do things that they haven't done before. And I'm confident, at Cutco, you start in this smaller, safe space, and you get a chance to take on bigger spaces over time.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. We I think that we epitomize the growth mindset concept. I feel like that is part of the fiber of who we are. And so there's always a striving to learn, there's always a striving to improve, and there's always some level of innovation. Our innovation curve spiked in 2020 by necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And so now what we're trying to do is find the balance between the ways we challenged the process and, some of the tried and true methods that always worked in the past. I think that a difficulty some people in our organization have is what I guess I would describe as sort of a desirability bias. So like working at home or operating virtually, like they're all easier and more expedient. And people want them to work at a higher level than they have lately. And I have a mentor of mine that I was talking to one time about something. We were talking about angel investing. And he said, the problem with you, Dan, is you're too optimistic. So I've got this wanting of, things I like to work. And I'm trying to figure out where's that line between challenging the process and, okay, that's not working. We got to make sure we do things this way that we know it does work.
Well, Dan, let me tell you that we don't know where that line is. that reminds us again that leadership is an art and not a science. There's not a formula. And you get better at knowing what that line is like, the more experience that you have, and the more experience then you can share with others. Short of, you have young kids. With young kids, you only let them make small mistakes. You don't let them make, you don't let them make big mistakes. You're not letting your 8-year-old drive a car, but when that kid gets to be 16, you're going to have to. And so the challenges that they will face over time should be different. I think the knack perhaps of being able to kind of constantly innovate is through what we call the process of small wins. So we're delighted to see Aaron Judge hit 61 home runs, and maybe a few more in the days to come. I'm now dating this conversation, but over time, the baseball players that have the highest averages are guys who get singles and doubles, and the same thing is kind of true of studies of innovation. We even the famous Google has more small wins than they do kind of moonshots, big investments. And it's those small wins. And so maybe the optimism is, I've got this idea way into the future, but I've broken it into some steps, and sometimes along the path, it's gonna be 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But
Yeah.
we would have never taken that 1 step forward if we hadn't been willing to take the risk of going 2 steps forward.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you like analogies, it's as simple for sailors. You don't get to be a good sailor without going on a sailboat, and you don't get to be a good sailor if you never sail in a storm. And any sailor knows to get from point A to point B is never a straight line,
Right.
because you can't control the wind and the currents and the ocean and all those things. So progress in learning is never a straight line. It's always, hopefully it's kind of up to the right, and then there's kind of maybe a plateau, and then it's maybe you're going to go up to the right again and then plateau. That's what it looks like. So we shouldn't be too discouraged when everything doesn't go exactly the way that we planned.
Yeah. I like the idea of the willingness to make small mistakes while trying to avoid the big ones. I think
Yeah.
that has some great relevance that people can consider, how they're applying, their strategies for the years ahead for both our company and anybody else. That makes a lot of sense for sure. That was good. So
Yeah, those experiments, those small wins, and Dan, we're talking about these 5 practices as if they were all unique and independent, but they're not. When you as my manager demonstrate that you're challenging the process, you're trying to learn new things yourself. Well, that you're modeling the way for me in terms of saying, oh, I guess, if my boss is willing to make some mistakes, I guess I should be willing to make some mistakes too, particularly in pursuit of perfection, in pursuit of getting better, not to make mistakes for the purpose of making mistakes. But in the pursuit of getting better, we understand that we won't, always get it right.
Yep.
But I see my manager also kind of setting that example. I mean, gosh, if you want to kill innovation in an organization, tell people you got to get it right the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, okay, fine, I'll just do what I'm doing. Because, at least, better the devil I know, better,
Yeah.
this is working well enough. I don't want to take the chance that somehow, maybe I could get better, but maybe I'll get worse. And
Yeah. Good insights. That really leads well into the 4th practice, which is enable others to act. Help us understand a little more of what that looks like.
Well, remember, when people are at their personal best, we ask them, so what were you doing? And without exception, they always talk about that they had to get other people to buy into this inspiring and shared vision. but they also had to build a team, and building a team, involved making sure that other people felt uh, felt enabled, felt strong, felt confident. And even when they perhaps didn't feel confident themselves, they felt the confidence that their manager had in them. So many people told us that when they're at their personal best, they weren't at the beginning sure that they could do what they were asked to do or what they had signed up to do. But because their manager believed in them, that's kind of had, my manager has high expectations of me. Dan thinks I can do this. I've never done this before. I've never gone to that kind of a customer. I've never handled this kind of product line. I've never supervised that many people, but Dan thinks I can do it. Dan thinks I'm ready to take on this challenge. Dan's got my back. Well, all of a sudden, I'm maybe willing to do some things I've never done before.
Yeah.
And in those ways, I've been enabled to act, to do things that I didn't think that I could do.
Mm-hmm.
The training programs you have, the leadership development programs that you have at Cutco Vector are perfect examples of trying to make sure that we continue to grow and develop people so that they can take on greater and greater challenges or realize greater and greater opportunities. And that sense also of enabling others to act is also about making sure that people understand that they're not in this all by themselves. So building a sense of what we call psychological safety,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we all want to be 100% successful, but sometimes we're not going to be. And so is this a safe place to talk about the fact that I blew it with that customer, or I didn't follow up enough, or I didn't do this, or I didn't do that. And here's what I learned from that. And I hope the others on this team will learn from that. Or the tension that sometimes happens in a team, particularly a group of people that have been together for a long time, is, getting along with one another becomes more important than figuring out how we could be better. Not rocking the boat becomes kind of a way we deal with making sure everybody feels safe, as opposed to, gosh, let's support each other when we try to come up with ideas that might initially feel uncomfortable, but might take us to a place we've never been before, and we'd all be better off because of it. In some cultures, I know when I was doing some work in Australia, they have a expression of cutting down tall poppies. And so, the person who raises their hand and somehow says, well, I think maybe there's a better way to do this. Everybody goes, well, if there was a better way to do this, I'm sure somebody smarter or with more experience than you would have come up with that. So what makes you think you're so smart, and cut you down and put you back, sit there quietly and just do what you've been told to do. Well, that's in high performing organizations, Dan, this, everybody in the organization feels like they're a leader. And when you look the word leader up in a dictionary, it's not capitalized. It's not a position or a place, it's an attitude. It's a sense that somehow for everybody in your organization feeling like this place wouldn't be as good as it is if it wasn't for whatever it is that I do. Just before the pandemic, I did an in-person session the start of the school year for one of the local school districts here, and we were talking about this. And I remember one fellow was saying to me, he said to me, and he said to the group, he said, Barry, you're absolutely right. He said, what my group does here in this organization, this school district, we're absolutely the most important. And of course, I didn't know what he did, but he said, you don't know what I do, Barry, but I'm in charge of the transportation. He says, we run the bus system, and if we don't do our jobs, the kids don't get here to school. It doesn't make a difference how good the teachers are, how great the food in the cafeteria is, how lovely the campus looks. They don't get here, it doesn't matter. Well, we'd like everybody, no matter what they're doing, somehow feel again. And then once the kids get here, if we don't feed them right, then, then that's going to be a problem. And if we can't, we can't keep the lights on in the building, that's going to be a problem. And so everybody's trying to make sure that their piece of the puzzle makes a difference, and they're acting as if their piece was the thing that kept everything together.
Right.
That's how we really enable others to act.
I like that. Just making sure each person realizes the importance of their role on a team or in an organization. One of the things I've really strived to get into the bloodstream of our people is the idea of embracing feedback. Whether we agree with it or not, it's the only way to create that situation where the tall trees aren't cut down, right? Is where you embrace any type of feedback, embracing even dissent, so that people can feel comfortable disagreeing. And that's, like you said, that's how the best ideas end up being formulated, right? Is that somebody takes you from this place over here and moves you a little bit over here because they're way over here. And it helps you arrive at what the truth is a lot of times when that type of interaction exists between the people on a team.
Yeah. If we want to get better, we can't get better without knowing how we're doing today, and then be able to get, and then if we want to get better, then trying to figure out, well, what would we have to do, and practice it, get some coaching, and then, and measure it again to find out whether or not we made some improvement. Now, interestingly, Dan, I've been trying to change my own language here, suggesting that, that there's people want feedback, especially feedback that confirms how great they are. And few of us want to give feedback that doesn't do exactly that. So I've been suggesting recently that really what we ought to be doing is we ought to be really asking people for their advice. Advice doesn't have the same evaluative sort of notion that feedback does. So instead of saying to somebody, well, tell me, give me some feedback on how I ran that meeting, I might ask rather, what advice would you have for me about how we can make those meetings more effective? What are two or three things that you might suggest that would make the team, more cohesive? What advice would you give me? Advice just people can come up, people can brainstorm and come up with ideas without having to sense that this is a criticism of things that you're doing well or not doing well.
Yeah, great one. I like that. That's excellent. Nice. In terms of enabling others to act, Barry, how does somebody mix, the idea of empowerment and delegation and letting people do things, but make sure that we don't lose sight of the importance of results and accountability?
Sure. Well, we talk about leaders provide guided autonomy. So, so it's not and part of, again, inspiring a shared vision is to provide that guided autonomy. So it's not like you can go north, east, south, west, any direction you want. That's not, that we're not, none of us are that powerful. We can do whatever we want.
Right.
So here, as my manager or as the organization, you guide me and you sort of say, look, this is the direction we're going to go in. We're going to go in north. We're going to treat customers in these ways, not in these other ways, but in these ways. We're going to say that, that these are things we do when it comes to safety. I mean, these are so we can provide people some guidance, even if we suggest that there's more than one way to get there. So leaders oftentimes need to be clear about what we might call the end goal and the means by which people should use to get there, but not necessarily the steps that people want to take. If you watch in particular amateur golfers, you can appreciate that, while everybody starts in the tee box at the same place and everybody has the same objective to get the ball in that little cup on the green, there are an enormous number of ways to get from, point A to get to point A to point B, and sometimes with the exact same scores. I'm not saying, one, obviously, you can get there, there are better ways to get there, but gosh, again, amateurs, we know that we don't always hit the ball. We seldom hit the ball straight. So, so we're zigzagging to kind of get there. And the other wonderful golf expression is, if you knew your next shot was going to be great, you wouldn't worry about how lousy your last shot was. And that's a kind of an interesting leadership idea as well. You're going to make mistakes, but if you learn something from it, then you wouldn't care so much that didn't work out so well. In fact, you might say, gosh, I got more out of that because from what I learned than I might have had that been an easy sale or an easy act.
Yeah.
And that leads us, Dan, to we like to say the fifth practice. It's not the last practice, because encouraging the heart can't be the very last thing that you do.
Right.
Because people need to be encouraged all along the way. A small win is an act of encouragement. Given an opportunity to do something that you've never done before, and take a risk, in some ways is an act of encouragement, because it says, gee, this person trusts me. This person believes in me. And again, when people were at their personal best, they didn't say, I encouraged the heart. They said, I made sure that I recognized people for their accomplishments. We celebrated. We made sure that we enjoyed each other's company. We use the term encourage because it has as its root courage. That in essence, what we need to do, if we're going to ask people to do something they've never done before, they need to feel not just in their hands and in their head, but in their heart. They need to believe that somehow that they have the courage, the fortitude to be able to do something that's never been done before. So leaders have to kind of know their people well enough so that they can figure out at an individual level, how do I make sure that this person feels appreciated and valued, not just for what they do, but also for who they are. And then how do I celebrate our accomplishments, realizing that that running back who scored, who ran for 200 yards, comes back, and the first group of people, the football player he wants to thank are the linemen, because they were the ones, they were the ones that made it possible for him to gain 200 yards.
Exactly.
And he's going to take them all out to dinner and buy them steak and make sure they stay big and healthy, because they make it possible for him to be successful. So we want to try to bring people together to also appreciate the fact that, again, you're important, you matter, but you can't do it all by yourself.
Yeah.
And that comes back full circle, because the things we ought to be celebrating and recognizing come back to what we identified as model the way, in terms of, well, what are the principles and values that we hold dear? And let's make sure then we're recognizing people who are doing those things.
Yeah. I
think a classic example, Dan, in sales is, you say teamwork is really important, but, the gal or the guy who gets ahead is the one who's got the best bottom line results, but doesn't talk to anybody else in the organization and never shows up for team meetings. I know at one large retail organization, they keep track of how many people are getting paid primarily, on commission, but they keep track of how many sales that you write up to make sure that you're not hogging kind of, what's going on in the store, so that so that you're finding the balance there of trying to kind of be successful, but not to engage in a zero-sum kind of competition. and particularly then, not, making sure you don't put down your teammates. Say, well,
Right.
you know, I'm sure you didn't get helped very well by that other person. So let me see what I can do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not so much a issue that we have, in that there's, we can pretty much create our market, and it's an endless supply in essence. I want to ask you, Barry, about positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement with encouraging the heart.
Yeah.
I have a friend whose wife is an animal trainer. And
Right.
one time I asked him the question, what % of animal training is positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement? And I thought he was going to give me like, 90-10 or like 95-5. And he said, it's 100 and 0. Animal training is 100% positive reinforcement, 0 negative reinforcement. Now, I've been a leader for many years. I'm not so sure that's possible in leading humans. I'm not sure that's possible in parenting kids, that it's 100% positive reinforcement. But I've always strived to get that, to find ways of flipping feedback or flipping correction into being somehow positive and steering toward the future versus harping on something that already happened and we can't change.
Sure.
How do you view that balance
Well,
between positive and negative reinforcement?
with negative reinforcement, you think about it with a dog. When you can take a newspaper and hit the dog when the dog does something wrong. And then what the dog learns from that is to avoid you when you have a newspaper in your hands. Doesn't learn the right thing to do, but avoids being in your presence when you have a newspaper in your hand.
Interesting.
That's what happens in particular, but it happens with people too. When you don't get along with your boss, you make an effort to avoid your boss. When you don't, and you can do it in a variety of different ways. Sometimes just quite passive. You just can sit there and don't say anything, and even when you think you might have something to contribute, you just don't bother, because you'd be happy to see your boss be unsuccessful. So that's a little bit of kind of human nature. Now, the research suggests something like this, suggests that kind of in the workplace, what's called the PNR, the positive to negative ratio, is something over time that's about 3 to 1.
Right.
And that's both verbal and nonverbal. The nonverbal, the positive nonverbal is, the smile and your eyes lighting up. The nonverbal is rolling your head, looking down, sighing. There's a classic study that looked at project teams, and what they found, it was in the best project teams, the ratio was about 6 to 1. In average performing project teams, the ratio was only about 2 to 1. And in the lowest performing teams, the ratio was about 1 to 3. The lowest performing teams, everybody spent time complaining about what everybody else was doing, not taking any responsibility, but saying, well, if you had done this, and if you had done this, and if it wasn't for that, we could have, they just spent their time doing those kinds of things. So it's not a, again, it's not formulaic, but it is trying on balance to be able to make sure that you're on the lookout for people doing things right.
Yeah.
And again, right back to model the way. What is right? How do I know what the right thing is, and how do other people know the right thing is? And how do other people know that I know what the right thing is? They know it when I go to them and say, we said this is the right thing, and you did the right thing, and I want you to know that's terrific, and keep up doing that right, whatever that right thing is.
Yeah.
That's why, for example, when it comes to encouraging the heart, we talk about making sure that encouragement needs to be both personalized to the 5-year-old, to the 15-year-old, to the 30-year-old, and it needs to be personal in the sense that you personally need to be involved. uh, encouragement is not done very well secondhand, and is not done very well when there's a big time lapse between, you know, gee, 4 months ago you did a really good job in this case. Well, a
Right.
lot's happened since then, and you only heard it third hand. I mean, can you imagine? This happened recently. I went to a wedding, and the officiant got the people's names incorrect. Didn't, was, and everybody kind of chuckled, and obviously didn't know these people very well. Was kind of, if you will, was kind of just there doing a job,
Right.
as opposed to hoping who the officiant, the leader in that wedding ceremony, you would hope, would know something about the couple, and would have at least spent some time learning about the couple, and learning something about them personally.
Of course.
So
Yeah.
when you call somebody on stage, or when you interview me or somebody else, you want to make sure you get their name right.
Exactly.
Something, perhaps as small as that, but the same thing, it shows up in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And encouraging the heart is often, it's the little things that typically matter more than actually the financial stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean,
I like what you said about the 3 to 4, 5, 6 positive interactions for everyone. The one opportunity for negative interaction, or a difficult interaction, or one where there's negative feedback or a punishment or stuff like that, those are going to happen. They're going to come up. The key to having that 3, 4, 5, 6 is to look for all of the opportunities to have positive interactions and to take them when they come up. Be a good finder, someone who catches people doing things right.
You catch all those things, Dan, because you kind of build credit in the bank. And then when you have to go to the person and withdraw, look, I think you're terrific. And yet in this particular incident, you weren't at your best.
Right.
And I'm telling you this, and here's the other piece of it. I'm telling you this because you know that I have your best interest at heart. And so while this is a, it's what we might even call a difficult conversation. But you know that the reason why I want to have this conversation with you is because I believe that you're a good, capable person, and you want to do good. You didn't get up this morning and ask yourself, well, how can I screw up? Even if you did, but it wasn't your intention. So let's kind of unpack this and see what we can learn from it and make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, great example. I like how you put that. That was great. Barry, this has been awesome. Fantastic value added for the audience. I want to fire one last question at you, which is this. I know you have a principle that leadership is everyone's business. And I just want to let you wrap this up by explaining why you feel it's important for everyone who's listening to strive to become an exemplary leader.
Well, thank you, Dan, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about these ideas that I think are so important, because in the end, high-performing organizations are filled with people who believe that they make a difference, and that's why it's everybody's business. Because if we're not striving to be our best, no matter where we are in the organization, from the frontline receptionist to the top of the organization, we need everybody to feel like they're making a difference, and that what they do matters. And so, whether it's Cutco Vector or Santa Clara University or any organization, and that's a sense of making sure that people also feel empowered. If you go back to the data, here's being at your personal best. We've asked thousands of people to tell us about a time when they've been at their personal best, and just take a moment and think about this data. Everybody's had a story to tell us. Everybody. Doesn't make a difference their age, their gender, their nationality, their function. I mean, just as a leadership scholar, just imagine what this means if everybody is capable of telling us about a time that they've been at their personal best, we immediately have to conclude that everybody's capable of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we ask people to say, well, tell us about what you were doing, well, obviously the context, the context and the content may be different, but the strategies, the actions, the behaviors are so very similar that if we can remember these 5 practices, we can increase dramatically the probability of being effective. It's not a science. Not, you can do all this stuff and still get fired. You can be ahead of the marketplace, and things didn't work out. But for all of us, we can enormously be more successful by embracing these 5 practices and thinking about what we can do to become the best leaders that we can be. And I think for those of us that are in actual positions of leadership, we actually owe it to our people. I speak about this as a moral imperative. We owe it to the people who report to us to be the best leader that we can be. They want us to be that, and we owe it to them.
Agreed. Couldn't have said it better myself. That was fantastic. These 5 practices have been a part of, who I am as a leader, going back 30 plus years since my time there at Santa Clara University.
Sure.
I'm really grateful for that, and grateful for the wisdom that you have shared with the world, and really, really appreciate the fact that you've taken time to be with our audience here today, Barry. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate it, and thank you again for this opportunity, and nice to catch up with you a few decades later.
Exactly. Thanks.
Sure.
There you have it, folks. Dr. Barry Posner, such a wise and experienced and just a person of such great depth in this space of leadership. The first practice, modeling the way, right? A leader who knows who they are at their core, has clear values, right? And objectives that spin out of or are based on those values. A leader who is deeply committed to what they're doing and thus leads truly by example. I love Barry saying that the messenger is more important than the message, right? That's first, right? Who are you as a leader? He also mentioned the importance of high tech and high touch in that section, which I think is a great reminder for all of us in the Cutco Vector sphere who are navigating this sort of post-pandemic world. The second practice was inspiring a shared vision. Communicate was one of the key points there. Communicating the vision. You cannot over communicate the vision that you have. Having a vision also that is collaboratively created. Communicating with passion, right? Something that you're passionate about, that's positive and optimistic. And then that, that WIIFM concept, what's in it for me, helping people see the benefit to them of being a part of that vision. A greater vision, by the way, creates more accountability for individuals to hit their own individual goals. And that's why I've always felt like everybody should buy into team goals, because it gives you an added reason, an added tool in your toolbox to inspire and motivate yourself to be at your best when you know that other people are counting on you because you're a part of something bigger than just you. The third practice is challenging the process. Barry said that a challenge is an opportunity for greatness, right? And so anytime we look at new ways of doing things or ways of improving, ways of growing, we're allowing ourselves the opportunity to become great. That growth mindset that he described, which is so critical, and the idea of being willing to make small mistakes along the way to the success that you aspire to. The fourth practice was enabling others to act. I love where he said that feeling that somebody believes in me, right? Do you give people that feeling that you believe in them? Do you communicate that to your people? And then encouraging feedback, or as he said, encouraging advice, which opens the doors for all sorts of ideas to be shared and helps us to arrive at the best ways of operating, arrive at what is the truth about any situation that we're trying to learn about or grow through. He used the words guided autonomy when describing the process of delegation blended with accountability. And then, of course, the fifth practice was encouraging the heart, the idea of giving people opportunities to act, opportunities to do things that they might not otherwise do. Like I think about the Cutco Vector Branch Manager Program as a classic example here of where we give people a tremendous opportunity to do something way out of the bounds of what most young people would even attempt. And then finding small wins, celebrating those accomplishments, right? Catching people doing things right. Such great ideas, such a great framework for what makes a tremendous leader, an exemplary leader. And as Barry said there toward the end, there's a moral imperative for us who are listening to this podcast today to all become the best leaders that we can be. We owe it to the world to become the best leaders that we can be. The world needs more leaders, needs more people to show the way and inspire other people and to do all of these things that Barry described as the elements that have made people at their best as a leader. And these are all things that we hope that each of you listening can learn and can implement and can live in your personal and professional lives. Thank you so much, Dr. Barry Posner, one more time. I really appreciate the value added to the podcast today, and I hope you got a lot out of this episode.